way that we're looking at fascia, at least people like you, myself, and again, the fascial community, is the idea that it's not just myofascia. We need to look at the fascial continuum. So, you know, these people who are telling you.
So I'm here with Sue Hitzmann, and Sue's in New York. I'm here in South London. Sunny day here, but we're both kind of locked in, in lockdown. One thing I have noticed, there's been a bit of a glitch sometimes on the line, but it might just be the internet, but it works out okay. But Sue is the well-known author of the Melt Method, and I know there's another book that's come out from this as well. Also I've seen that Sue's, you know, done a lot of work on TV and been online, and in my mind, you know, it's one of the, forgive me in saying this, it's like one of the celebrities really out there in the world, because you actually are being out there in TV. You know, this has been a New York Times bestseller book as well.
Yes.
So you've kind of really taken that whole world of fascia and kind of like put it in the public face immediately. But not only have you been able to do that, where you get a lot of celebrities that might be in some form or another that can't really back up their subject. You back up your subject because you've been in the lab, you've got down and dirty with it, you've felt it, you've been through the kind of the pain and heartache of teaching and working, running businesses, keeping all that together. So, you know, when you talk about it, the person receiving it feels it. And one thing that really got me was when you were at that British Fascia Symposium when you were presenting. You know, Sue's got a particular way of being on screen, and you get your energy anyway. And we're friends, and we've met you in New York over coffee and dinner with my wife and her daughter. So Sue's got this amazing, passionate energy that kind of embraces you. But when Sue was on stage, even the people, she could have held the Albert Hall, because the people at the back just get enthralled, and it's dynamic, and you can feel every word that she says. You know, nothing goes to waste. So that was really, really amazing to witness and be around. And, you know, it's been a privilege to know you as a friend as well. You know, even if we never worked together, you know, to hang out with you as a friend has been a really cool thing. And
thank you so much for all that. That's so nice.
Oh, it's just kind of, you know, how did Sue Hitzmann get to where she is now? You know, where did you start?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I've been in the fitness industry since I'm 16 years old and fascinated with aging. I was just a young person who you know, didn't like the idea of aging, because to me, I looked at my great grandmother, who was this super spry woman, and then the next year she didn't know who I was, and she was, you know, had Alzheimer's and couldn't talk anymore. And I just said to my aunt, what happened to great grandma? And she said, well, she just got old. And I was like, am I going to get old? And she said, yeah. I said, how do you stop that from happening? You know, like, so I've always sort of been, you know, wanting to understand the idea of senescence and aging and what that was. And, you know, I grew up in the 70s. So what epitomized wellness was people, you know, people like Jane Fonda and Jack LaLanne. So I got into the fitness industry with this idea that if you ate right and you exercised, you'd lead a healthy, active, robust life. And, you know, got a master's in physiology and anatomy, and met Leon Chatow and Judy Delaney, and got into neuromuscular therapy in my 20s, and thought I was like so smart and I knew everything about how to keep the human body functioning well. And in my late 20s, I got into chronic pain that started out as foot pain and got diagnosed as plantar fasciitis, but then quite quickly turned into this body-wide fatigue, and I was exhausted all the time. And I think it really messed up my mind, because I really thought, my gosh, this is it. I'm aging and this is never going to go away. And the doctor started talking about lupus and MS and Parkinson's and all these other things. I was like, wait a minute, you know. And the thing about, you know, MS or lupus is that those are connective tissue related, and seeing they called it plantar fasciitis, I thought, could my fascia be inflamed? And is that maybe what's causing my pain? And if it is, like, you know, how do you exercise your fascia? There's no exercise for that, right? So in the late 90s, I really started to take a deeper dive into understanding fascia. And that was the year where Google came out. So the very first word I typed into the internet was fascia. And it completely spiraled me out of the traditional confines of the anatomical and biological research and study that I had done for so many years. And it opened up this whole new world, and come to find in Europe, this was already emerging a lot, and I just had no idea. So I met Tom Findlay and Robert Schleip and Tom Myers and all these other people, and then Gil Hadley. And Gil does this layer by layer dissection course. And that just, you know, completely changed my idea of the human form. Yeah, and so that's kind of like where I got into the fascial community. And then developing Melt really spawned out of my private practice and trying to empower my clients to get out of my office and start to actively participate in their healing. And I just started developing tools and techniques that would simulate manual therapeutic intervention and get them to do things at home. And what was amazing was the results were really incredible. After doing that for about 6 years, I really knew I had something. And in 2004, I thought, gee, I'm gonna see if I can teach this in a group environment like I do fitness. And I coined the term Melt. I started teaching it. And, you know, today I've got 2,000 instructors worldwide, 2 books, a New York Times bestseller. And, you know, I'm just out there. My passion is trying to take very complex neuroscience and fascial research and simplify it down to educate the general public on what is it that causes pain to become chronic, and what can you do through self-care to alleviate that traditional medicine, exercise, and nutrition doesn't address. And that's been my contribution to our industry.
Yeah, and I think it's a major contribution, you know, and it's in my mind, it's, you know, it's one of the only sort of self-care methods that really does approach the body that way. You know, there's lots of other, you know, sort of self-care methods and rolling methods that have attempted to do that, but because you have an understanding of the layout, you know, there's something profound about being in a dissection lab where you just learn so much about feel. You know, it's I had lots of critique. You know, I think I started dissecting in about 2004 or something like that. And that was with Tom here in the Institute of Anatomy in Vienna, and it was so profound that my landscape of the body just changed in an instant. And, you know, Todd, like Gil, well, Todd actually was asking the question when we first walked in, you know, what are your models of the body and what would you like to break down? And what is it that you would like to see? What's your project? And that literally sideswiped me, because I, first of all, was standing outside these doors holding some rubber gloves in a box and my white coat, petrified to go in this room. And then it just came to me. I just thought, actually, I've got one here. If I was a femur, what would my landscape look like if I was a bone? Because like the anatomy chart behind you, you only see it from the outside.
Right.
The map. So I just went about removing everything as a piece and then laying it around the other way.
Mm-hmm.
For a completely different set of shapes that muscle chart doesn't show.
Well, that's just it, right? Is that, you know, when we're trying to demonstrate continuity, connection, you know, how is it that we remain stable? And that's been the question that I've been asking for a lifetime. And when I say stable, I don't mean like how well people balance on a Bosu ball, right? I'm talking about stability on every level: chemical, hormonal, metabolic, hormonal, all of the ways that we talk about homeostasis, balance, regulation, whatever you want to call it. And the thing that, you know, was, I think, a shift for me in the anatomy wasn't just fascia, but when you really start to understand how the brain produces our sense of pain, that the concepts of neuroscience, neuroplasticity, potentiation, synaptic pruning, and all of these other components of how we tie an emotion to a pain problem, and then how that can manifest itself into a chronic problem, you know, and even in this climate, of the coronavirus, and people are so freaking stressed out. And you and I were talking about that. Like, you walk down the street and people like jump out of the way, and I'm like, my God, do I look like a mutant? I don't have corona. I tested negative. Like, I wanted to say that to people, So I just think that the traditional concepts of muscles and bones, the idea of biomechanics and pulleys and levers are only valid if you take a deeper dive into how the brain functions to move us, and how fascia allows things to stay connected and integrated as a homogeneous, cohesive system. I mean, you can't really define movement unless you understand the neurofascial system. If you just are talking about musculoskeletal, you're piecemealing the human being, and that's not real anatomy in my mind anymore.
Yeah, well, and this is interesting in the Fascial Net project. So I can't believe I was out there in January. It feels like a lifetime ago now. But I was presenting when I was there, and then I did a presentation around the actual body walls part of the Placentarium to show to the group how we're trying to visualize the form that we're trying to create for the Montreal Congress. And I had to sit and look at these pieces and realize what was missing all of the time. And they do show fascia. So the one thing I was making a point to Robert and Gil, that they were there as well, is that the fascia is there. It's just that the way it's been colored, the way they make it happen on the plastination models, is it just goes a creamy color and it gets lost in your vision because they've colored the muscles so brightly, your eyes go there straight away. And if you just pull back with the eyes, you start to see these things unfold in front of you. And it's really interesting. So I was trying to get them to see what wasn't there, and it was hinted at every now and again. And I think this is something that happens when we start looking at a body when you're moving it. Even though they've got clothes on, even though there's skin there, you can still see the kind of the layout of that fabric of the body move differently to just the muscular movement. And your eyes get used to understand.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually think the big thing for me too is that the concepts, like when I in 2004 when I did that first dissection with Gil, that, like, again, I walked around angry. Like, I went back down to NYU and I was like, I want my money back. Like, how can I be, how can I have an exercise science degree and there's this whole system in the body that's super important that you never even really talked about? I was so mad. But the thing is, when I really started learning about fascia, the introduction to really look at it as a cohesive system was an idea that Gil plopped into my mind like a seed. And although today everybody seems to be a myofascial expert, and the myofascial concepts have infiltrated themselves into fitness, but that's still a segmented concept, that there are these, like, lines. And Tom Myers, I love the model of the myofascial lines. And what's a meridian? It's a point A to a point B that you can actually draw a line to. So yes, there are these true longitudinal connections in our body, and fascia isn't in planes only. It's infused like a grid. And yeah, it's coming every which way, and it's attaching your skin to your bones. So the way that we're looking at fascia, at least people like you, myself, and again, the fascial community, is the idea that it's not just myofascia. We need to look at the fascial continuum. So, these people who are telling you to scratch at your skin because you got cellulite and bruise yourself, they're not really, they're not looking at the continuum. They're just like, self-mutilating the superficial fascia, which is where all the lymph is and all of the fat, where, that's where your hormones are. So there's just so much implication in self-care and treatment that still needs to be figured out, discovered, refined, and studied if you want to talk about fascia as a system. And that's the thing that's got to, I think, still get out into the world. That's what I've tried to do, in my humble way of trying to, plop that little egg into the general public's world. And whether or not they still understand that, I mean, people see the roller and they think, oh, melt is foam rolling. And I'm like, it's not foam rolling. It's not about the myofascia. I don't, what did I say at the BFS? Muscles are fascia's bitch. They're going to do whatever the fascia tells it to do. So the muscles aren't what are important. The fascia as a continuum is what's important. And that's really, I think, more and more will get more notoriety because the research and the atomic force microscopy and the fascial research, group will continue to try to push these concepts forward. And I think it will help everything from pain problems to medical care, to how we treat bone disorders and our immune system, and how our immune system functions.
Yeah, definitely. And given what's been discovered really with the vessels that exit the bone and enter the bone, these microscopic vessels, all of a sudden that's a whole new picture of the bone. And
Yeah.
wouldn't it make sense that, of course, the immune response has got to go through that? It can't just rely on the large vessels. It's got to almost permeate the bone. So if you're, and we know that the periosteum is just as sensitive as the skin. So you've got these sensory mediums that, with pulsation and rhythm, of course, it's going to allow that to happen all the time, not only by, the quality of work that you would be doing, but just the action of a body moving, is kind of, massaging and squeezing the bone all of the time. So it's already readily available for us, and I think, like you said, that research is going to help how we language it. This is something that I'm really interested in, is how do we language movement now so that we can bring about a sensation for somebody, and they will learn to understand that differently. Because, if someone starts talking about the spine as a column, that's what they get. If they start talking about the ribs as a cage, that's what they get, because they believe it to be that way. But if we start to consider that actually the spine, it can't hold you up that way, it's more of a segmented, spring-loaded structure, there's a different conversation. Even in Germany, they don't have the word cage for rib, it's rib basket. Same in Austria as well. It's completely different. Actually, that reminds me, a friend of mine was doing lots of trauma work in Ethiopia years ago. And when he came to one of my sessions and I was talking about the foot and the leg, he said, in Ethiopia, they don't have a word for foot. Leg fingers.
Ah, interesting.
Train in Turkey, and I thought that completely changes the aspect of the leg and the foot, because it's anatomized at the ankle. It's one thing. So the moment we start shifting language, and I was just talking about this with James Earls about 2 hours ago, is that there isn't a movement language yet that kind of sits on the shoulders of anatomy and can take it into something by understanding some kind of anatomy, but what's the language of motion now?
It's such a great thought too. And, we know that the nomenclature of fascia, when you use that word, that that the scientific committee has yet to really fully define or create a single definition for it. But I feel like, to define something is to put it in a box. And I think that's the problem with fascia, is that it's such a massive, whole body structure. It's the same thing as the skin being an organ, and people not understanding that, gosh, if you have psoriasis or eczema, that's not just a skin problem, that's a respiratory problem, right? That's an oxygenation problem, that's a nutrient transportation problem. And so it's all fascial related. So to be able to really hone in on fascia as a whole system that's not just, stabilizing muscles and bones, but that it's a neural signaling transportation system. It's a lymph support system. It's transporting nutrient and waste through our bodies. And so the roles that it's playing are so vast. I think that that's the hard thing, is thinking that we're going to come up with a I'm not sure where my thing is. Sorry about that. We're not 100% sure on how to define fascia. And I think that we're just at the beginning of really creating the opportunity for clinicians to properly measure it, because that's what you need to do, right? In science, it just can't be like, I mean, we've helped tens of thousands of people using melt alleviate chronic pain symptoms. And people are like, well, you know, we need you to measure the fascia. And I'm like, I don't know if that's what we need to measure. I think what we want to measure is how the nervous system is adapting and changing, whether that be through neural plasticity, whether that be through you know, sensory responsive, efferent to afferent changes that happen because of gentle compression. The diaphragm, how you're stimulating the diaphragm and transforming the volume of respiration that happens and all the implications that has. So I think that there's just a lot of opportunity here for us to not separate fascia from the other structures, but to figure out how to integrate the conversation and then measure it through all other systems in the body. And I think it's going to take time, but I think we'll get there.
Yes, this is something I'm attempting to do with the course that I run, so that we kind of, you know, the fascia is introduced almost at the beginning, but we dance in and out of the language. So we're talking about structure, and then there's this fascial relationship to this, but then back to another structure, but it's fascial relationship to that. So it's being introduced all of the time. So the language is just coming into the background, and in a way, it's a bit like the white page that you're putting the writing onto. You know, that's the medium there. Were you at the Washington Fascia Congress?
I was.
Yeah, so there was a group of people from China there, and they did do a couple of talks, and they had a terminology that they said they've been using forever, which is called fasciology. And I just thought, well, there's the word, you know, that does nail it, because it actually puts it in a particular place, and it actually sounds a little bit more important when it's said that way.
But well, that's it, is that now people are fasciologists, and I'm like,
you know, this is what, yeah, this is the problem. Is I think what the West would do with it is do that with it, where they've been sitting on it for a long, long time. All of the books were in Chinese. There wasn't one English translation of it, but something that he was kind of commenting on, and he described one of his slides in the same way, because I'm studied in traditional Chinese medicine and shiatsu as well, is that he kind of described it in the TCM way, where you've got, you know, fire, water, earth, metal, and so on, and wood. And when we look at traditional Chinese medicine, there's this really gray area in terms of treatment, and there's a region in the body in TCM known as the triple heater or triple warmer. And everyone's tried to figure out what the hell that is, but it's more of the fluid content of the body in its different ranges and layers and consistencies. Is that the place that sits there is the fascia. And they were considering that if you're looking at wood, so he used an image of a tree, but you've got the earth that supports the wood and the air and everything. It's where the air and the surfaces touch each other is that interfacing medium. So the air that's touching your skin, that medium there is
right.
That's touching the ground and you, the point of contact.
Mm-hmm.
There's a connectivity there that is not necessarily able to be seen by the human eye, but there's something contacting us.
Yes, well, and I think that also, you know, you're saying this, and I describe this in my trainings as I say, you know, may I be so bold as to perhaps propose that the fascia is the chi of the body. It is the chi system, because when you look at Chinese medicine, and they're always talking about the energy field and how it's moving through the body and all these motions, is that not the myofascial chains? That doesn't that seem to interlay with these meridians and all these components? And now, yes, we're saying, gee, you know, yeah, acupuncture, and is that why people can put a needle here and release something somewhere else? I think that these are the things that we need to describe. Also, you know, when you treat your hands and your feet, you know, we recept information differently from these regions rather than these regions. The receptors that are so in our hands are very unique. And that's why, like with the melt hand and foot techniques, I always say, if you're going to engage in self-care, do the indirect before direct approach, because if you stimulate fluid flow from the extremities to the central part of the body, rather than starting at the central components, like if your neck hurts, you go right after your neck, you're offering your nervous system more time to adapt, as well as allowing the fluids of fascia to adapt, right? Because as much as we always talk about the collagen matrix, the fluid flow of fascia, its relationship from fascia to lymph, is so critical to our overall health and well-being, respiration, and everything. So I feel like we need to, and that's what melt, like that's been the theory of melt since I ever created it, was when I put my hands on a body that I can feel fluid flow. And I don't have a description for it, but I can tell you that between the superficial fascia that you can pull up and let go and the deeper layers, that if you find your own, when I put my hands on somebody and get to just that level, it's a current. I can feel a current, and I don't think it's, I mean, I guess it's an energy current, but it's a fluid current. I can feel the fluid moving under that layer. And that was what I proposed. And when I talked to Tom Finley and said, I want to do a research paper, you know, it's this fluid flow. And now, you know, everybody's talking about fluid flow. You know, 20 years later, fluid flow is the concept that we're now looking at. And I think it's going to answer a lot of questions, especially for the Chinese meridians and Qi. I think that that's what it is. I think fascia is the inherent link to the frequency of our field, of our bioelectrical field between me, you, and all the other things around me.
Something about that with fluid flow, it was something we looked at a few years ago in St Andrews at the laboratories we use there. And we're using a suffix on the form. So skin and superficial fascia had been taken away. So we had the fascia lata and crural fascia still in place, and some of the vessels were there. And of course, you know, a lot of the embalming fluids, the sulfix embalming fluids were in the vessels, and the vessels were quite clear at that point. And the moment we started to move the foot and the hip in almost opposing directions, all you could see was fluid move up and down. And the movement was barely this, Sue. Mm-hmm. Just watch these, and even though they're, you know, the fluids now that are replacing the fluids that are there, you can still see transmission, because every single, you know, if we go with the idea of layers for the moment, every single stocking that was wrapped over the next was pressurizing the system, and you could see it move. So it barely needed to move very much at ends, but you saw a lot of motion going on there.
Absolutely. You know, when this past year, I got to take a dissection with Tom Myers. Yeah. And what Tom was doing was demonstrating in the body, right, the connections of these myofascial chains. And what he did was, instead of removing them to demonstrate the connection, he kept the lines in and we removed everything else. And what is really something that I hadn't really, I guess, thought of in the previous dissections that I've done is that, you know, when you start removing connections, the body gets loose. So you're not seeing the tension. But what was intriguing was you could remove a whole bunch of stuff, but if you kept that one myofascial chain connected, you could, just like how you're saying, move the foot so subtly, and you see up, you know, like movement coming up here, and it's like, whoa, you know. And that's in a you know, an unfixed cadaver. Imagine what's happening in a living human body where the fluids are well more abundant and moving in the structure. It really gives way to the idea of it is all connected, and why, you know, body workers and what you do is to explain to somebody that, you know, if your shoulder is bothering you, you've got to open up your hip to the shoulder, not just the glenohumeral joint. You're not going to get anywhere if you just treat this. And that's where physical therapy and some of these other practices really need to up their game, because they're working on outdated models.
Yeah, I'll show you something as we've been playing with as well. I'll have to use this. So, because, you know, following that line, there's something that I showed the group, you know, just a simple plank. And you, like in yoga, you see plank and chaturanga and stuff like that. I don't know whether this is going to sit on the bottom of your screen. Hopefully it is. But if I've got the head at this end and the foot at this end, and that person's down at the ground, all they need to do is just take the heel and head away from each other. Mm-hmm. And what you've got is someone that just floats up into a position. But what we get is a lot of people trying to move through those sort of actions, and they think they're not either strong enough in their upper body or they've been told to do more core stability. When if you just find the ends, that structure is going to glide and they end up appearing light. And then you've just got a moving tensegrity to it. You know, yeah. It's still there in situ. And it's
yes.
Shifting the language, and then they get a different experience within themselves.
Well, and I think you're right. You know, the language is really the beauty of connection, right? It's the language that you use. And, you know, two words can mean the same thing, but depending upon what the context is you're using, could have completely different meanings. Like if I said to you, you know, Gary, you're a vision. But then if I said, Gary, you're a sight. Well, sight and vision are the same thing, but suddenly I sound like I'm, you know, being mean to you, whereas a moment ago you were wonderful, right? So the way that we're explaining things and the words that we choose to use can really either create vagueness or it can start to bring people together. And when I see, you know, certain schools of thought combat each other because they feel threatened over their study. I mean, I remember being that way in my late 20s because I'd spent so many years under the confines of the idea of sensory motor control and sensory motor pathways. And it was all about muscles and timing and, you know, who fires first kind of a thing. But then when all of a sudden you add the concepts of fascia to it, saying fascia, it's not about, you know, just the actor and the releaser, you know, or the agonist antagonist, but that fascia is dispersing the force laterally around the structure, and perhaps it's the fascia that's actually preempting the muscles or informing the muscles on the other side, not the brain, about what the movement is going to be. And that blew my freaking mind. I mean, I just thought to myself, okay, I got to rethink anatomy. And it did. I mean, I literally I was somebody who was an international fitness presenter for almost a decade. And then I just disappeared off the face of the planet for 2 years and did this massive deep dive into trying to deconstruct what I knew and build a new foundation and then add back what I had spent so many years doing. And the model is just more cohesive. But I still think that even the people who are so hell-bent on fascia is it, I'm like, you've got to get some neuroscience into your language because your brain is also a very important structure. I know that we like to think of fascia as now being this autonomous system that is independent of the nervous system. But, you know, look, if I hit you on the arm really hard with a bat, your arm might really hurt you for a long time and you might not be able to move it well for a while. But if I took a bat and I hit you in your head just right, you might never move your arm again. So we really have to blend and marry neuroscience and fascial research to create a more cohesive model of a living human body and understanding longevity, cellular proliferation, and aging.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had Tom had a workshop in London about a year and a half ago at a big centre in London called Try Yoga. And I was booked to teach there a week later and do my workshop. And I had almost deliberately, almost deliberately called it "Fascia is useless, ... I went for lunch one day and he just gave me a nudge, just like, you know, what's that about? You know, and basically, you know, when I did that fascia lata dissection for the plastination project, it was as I removed it away from its underlying structures. And, you know, it's completely dependent upon everything else that it's linked to. It just doesn't exist on its own. So it's great, is you can stand your fascial body there and it would, you know, look like this, but it's never going to move. I could have the food and call it over and it can't move. It needs everything else. And this is our problem in Germany, is that the tissues are so fine when they're coming away that we have to wrap our forming cloth to make sure she's well protected, because every time she's handled, it breaks up and breaks up and breaks up. But when it's interfaced within all of the other tissues, it's as strong as hell. But you remove it, both tissues are ruined. And it's remarkable. So, you know, it's true. A lot of people say, yeah, fascia, fascia, fascia. Yeah, that's really interesting. However, it has to be part of the whole. You know, it can't remove it on its own. And
No,
it's,
yeah, you have to know it all. And I think what's wonderful is like when you look at, Stephen Levin's work and these ideas of just, flat out embryology, right? That you have to think of fascia both embryologically and physiologically, that you really do also, it's the same thing, little neuroscience. I think it would be great if we learned a little bit about embryology and the developmental phases of the form. And again, that's, I think, some of the flaws in fitness, manual therapy, medicine, is that we get very myopic over ideas. And unless you just open your mind and realize that there's just so much to learn, and the human body is just the most unbelievable system, and it's so complex and it's so rich. And again, thought patterns, right? Like not just our repetitive movement patterns and our repetitive postures, but our repetitive thinking processes, our repetitive emotional shading, if you will, is really going to dictate how our body thrives instead of survives over however many years we're going to be on this planet. And life is fleeting, and the human form, my spirit just chose this body, and thank God it picked a good one. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a good one, good. But I take such precious care of it, and I honor my body. And I think that these are things that need to be taught. And wouldn't it be an amazing thing if in elementary school kids learned about the human body and what's inside of them? I can share one time when I was doing a teacher training, my goddaughter came, and she was here with my best friend, and she said, I want to come and take your training. And I was like, okay. And she literally sat there and watched this. And I showed Dr. J.C. Gumberto's Strolling Under the Skin. And here's this, I think she was 7 at the time, watching this movie. And somewhere in the middle of it, she said to me, is that inside of me? And I said, it is. And she goes, no wonder we move so well. And it blew my mind. I just thought, wow, like that she got that in that fluid. That's why I move like this, right? Is because I'm juicy. She said. I was like, yes, exactly, God. So what a change that would be for people to learn about these things younger, and would that change our healthcare and the way that we take care of ourselves? I wonder.
kids just have that language that just nails it, because they say it as they see it. I've done lots of structure integration work on kids, and when they describe what they're feeling, because the parent might be there with them because they'll be quite young, and the parent tries to describe what's going on, and they'll try to describe it in intelligent terms to me. And I just said, well, can I hear from her or him? And one child said, it feels like I've got a Smartie, like an M&M stuck in a drinking straw tube. And I said, I get that. Absolutely, I understand what you mean by that. So we can start to work around that. And how does this feel over here? Said it feels like cotton wool that's all got stuck together.
Mm.
So yeah, that's the language that we can relate to, rather than, well, the cruel fascia has got stuck to it. That didn't mean a thing in that moment.
No.
They had an experience of sensation. And as it started to move, the kid with the M&M stuck in the drinking straw, she said, it feels like the chocolate is melting now. I was like,
Yeah, sensing and feeling, right? It's sensing and feeling ourselves in a different way. And I think that's the thing when you have pain with most people, is that we're so taught, and maybe it's just part of our human experience, is to tune it out or to get out of our bodies. Like when there's a problem, we want to numb it down. We drink alcohol, we do drugs, we get angry, we push things away, when really the healing opportunity is to go into our bodies and truly sense what we feel. And I get it, when you're in pain, you don't want to feel it, but that's actually the first part in healing is feeling. You can't heal if you don't feel.
Yeah, exactly. Great. That's a good t-shirt design.
Yeah, I've got my anatomical gangster t-shirts coming out with good, that'll be one of my quotes.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's going to be really cool. So,
Exactly.
so there was a point then from you being a fitness teacher to moving to this. So, you know, was it just something you noticed was missing, or what happened there at that point?
You know, for me, I think that when I got into pain in my late 20s, I discovered that dirty little secret of fitness is that everybody in the fitness industry is injured. And I didn't get into the fitness industry to get injured. I thought that, again, if you exercise, you know, you did enough of these, as many as you did these, and you did as many of these as you did these, you would become more aligned and more upright. And no, you know, look at the bodybuilders. They look like freaking monkeys, right? They don't look posturally aligned. So there was that really kind of, again, like we assume if we do things, like if we do yoga, you know, we're going to be more centered. If we exercise, we're going to be more fit. But it's not necessarily true. Just because you do something doesn't necessarily equal the result that you think you're going to get. So I think what I saw was, and this was the beauty for me, is that when I started learning about the healing arts and cranial sacral therapy and visceral manipulation, I really saw a gap between fitness and body work. So the goal of Melt was really to bridge the gap and bring body work into fitness, and also bring the concepts of group environment healing into the body work world. Because the one thing I can tell you, and it's so, you know, it's so upsetting, this idea that we're never going to get back into groups and touch people again, because touch is so essential. I mean, if you have a baby and you never touch them, they won't thrive. You know, when we're in a group environment, the heat, like, I mean, I feel it, like everybody's energy is all over the place. And when we do Melt together, it just brings the frequency of everybody together. And so in that connection, it actually creates an environment of healing. So that, I think, is something we don't talk about in fitness, because fitness is very singular, whereas healing to me is very global. It comes, it's like a shower over everyone. And I think that is what I find so, I don't know, it's so uplifting to me that I can treat one person and connect with that one person and blend with their energy and help them to facilitate healing. But I can also stand in front of a room with 200 people and talk them through the same exact process and feel the energy in the room change. And that, when I transitioned from doing from fitness to body work, and then taking body work and bringing it back into fitness, I don't know, I just knew that this was the thing that was missing in fitness, is understanding how to treat fascia just as much as we try to treat, you know, our muscles to make our bodies look lean. We also want our joints to work well, because the fitness industry is all about weight loss and muscle toning. But, you know, I don't know about you, but I've never heard of anybody getting a hamstring replacement, but I've certainly heard of a lot of people getting a knee and a hip replacement. So Melt is very joint focused, because that's what's missing in fitness, is understanding that muscles have less to do with joint stability than fascia. Fascia is what stabilizes your joints. And that's what people need to learn about, is how to care for that tissue.
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm in full agreement there. Totally.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be crazy if people started getting hamstring replacements? That would be wild.
It would be, you know, I mean, like, I don't want to get anything replaced. I don't want an injection. I don't want anything removed. I don't want anything stuffed into me. I just want to embrace the full potential of my cellular development over my lifetime. And this year I'm going to be 50, and that's a big thing for me, you know, and oh my gosh. And so, you know, I feel like I'm halfway through my life now, and what's this second half going to be like? And, you know, I mean, I've been hit with all sorts of emotional upheaval and life-changing, you know, occurrences that have just, you know, shattered pieces of my spirit and shattered parts of my heart. But you just pick up the pieces and you glue them back together, and those cracks are where the the beautiful life force shines through, and you just have to keep moving forward. And I think those words are important for people to hear also, because I'm hearing a lot of people saying things like, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. And I'm saying there's no back. And the more you keep waiting to go back to things that are normal, the more disappointed you're going to be 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, when you never get there, because there is no such thing. And we need to change, just how we started this whole conversation. We need to change our language to help our bodies thrive instead of survive. That's really an important piece, I think, for us, is the emotional connection to our physical body.
Yeah, and I think that resiliency, is about being resilient. So that can we be resilient to the situation that's going on? You've shown enormous resiliency. I know a lot of what's happened. We've all been through our stuff to some degree, and it's a bit like a tensegrity toy. You throw it to the ground, it bounces back again. But it's not just about like the myofascial tensegrity. There's a neurological tensegrity. There's an emotional tensegrity. It's all of those enmeshed qualities that have us be resilient enough. Yeah, we understand what's happened, but we've got to stand up, and we just keep going, and we know how to do that. And you have, it's like Sharon, the two of you have got the most amazing smiles. And there's something that kind of happens when you just go into the world and, okay, shit happens. I'm swearing in this thing, but that stuff goes on, but you just keep coming back, and it's going on. There's a reality there. We're not kind of covering it up. And when I'm teaching, especially the movement classes that I teach, and, there might be an element of yoga in there, that people say about flexibility. And I said, this is not about your body being flexible. This is about your ability to adapt. That's flexibility, not the fact that you can put your foot behind your leg. We're not interested in that. Does this teach you about yourself, so that, when you walk off out of the studio, and a friend of mine had this, he was a teacher, and his bike broke down, and he had to be somewhere, and he fell apart. He fell apart. Everything was going wrong, and he couldn't hold it together. And I just thought, well, hang on a second. Everything that you present when you're teaching and how you appear in the room is not happening when this thing has gone to pieces right now. Because it's not about what you do in the room. It's what you put in there into life. And of course we forget, as part of being human, but how long do we need to hang on to that? We're going to get up and breathe and carry on, It's interesting dynamic,
Yeah, I think that these are pieces that, this is why the education also that you're bringing forward is so important, because you're bringing, and I think that's, a lot of us in this group of educators is trying to paint a bigger picture of movement beyond function, beyond biomechanical function, that there's such a idea of something, and again, we can talk ourselves into problems, and we can ruminate and get stuck in the past, and it can manifest itself as physical problems in the future. So it's important that we stay in the present moment. And that's where I think for me, my mindful meditation practice and, many, many years of that type of philosophy, of Buddhist philosophy, has really come in to save me in times of emotional trauma, and to be able to consistently say, what's your problem right now? Like, what's the problem I have right now? And I'm like, I don't have a freaking problem. And boom, it gets me right back into the present moment, and I stop the rumination, so that so that it doesn't hurt me. Because our thoughts, what is that? Thoughts become patterns, patterns become movement, right? So it is the way that the mind can be shaped, that what we know now with neuroplasticity is that we can change our bodies with our minds, and we can certainly change the way that we think through our body as well. And with me, with melting, the idea of melt was to create a gentle approach to, why is it that in, foam rolling, people just go right after their bodies. If their bodies are hurting them, they think it's a good idea to, apply heavy pressure and, go right to the areas that hurt us. And that to me never made any sense. Like, why would you cause pain as your first route of getting out of pain? And although sometimes those things work, right? You know, you could have an injury that's not really healing that scar tissue and scratch the crap out of that scar tissue, create an inflammatory effect, and actually reinstigate a healing process. But that wouldn't be my first choice in treating someone. So I think that getting people to create better sensory awareness of their bodies, of themselves, of how they think, of you know, how the self-talk that we do. I just think that there's a lot of shaming that happens, fear and shame-based learning out there. I think that we are the dysfunction, not our bodies, right? We the way we think, our minds are like the most unreliable measure of what's going on in the world. Don't listen to that mind. That categorical mind sometimes is like lying to you. So, you know, again, I think that with movement, when you start to incorporate the concepts of fascia, the concepts of mind-body continuums, that you really get a much more rich connection of the self and get out of the ego mind and allow your being to be, what is it that Jaap van der Wal talks about, you know, the 1, 2, 3, like, you know, he talks about how, just how you said, it's the interface between things that is so unlooked at. And that's the thing about fascia, is that it's not, you know, it's not just layers categorically, but that it's infused and penetrated. And that's, and in every fiber, there is that 1, 2, 3 connection, and in every facet of us. And that's so big, because that is what's helping neural signaling to allow our mind to sense and feel what's going on in our body. Interoception, proprioception, all of these words we use, but really just body sense, to sense ourselves in a deeper level. And I think that's why touch is so essential. So I really am hoping that at some point we can all get together and have virtual, you know, this virtual hugging thing, you know. It's tough. It's not the same. I mean, it's nice that we have Zoom and these ability, you know, like these kind of talks, but you can't disregard how important touch is. And so if you're not being touched by someone, to touch yourself in a loving way, to lather yourself up when you're in the shower, to rub moisturizer on you, vibration, you know, I mean, vibration on any level, whether it's, you know, using a vibrator on a sexual level, or, you know, you're putting vibration on your arm to stimulate the cells. Our touch has vibration. So frequency, the way that we soothe ourselves, I think is, again, it's not intuitive. I think that it does need to be taught, because I think in this modern world, we can become very despondent and separate from each other. And with this virus being where it is and how it is, I think the fear and the scarcity of connection is going to create some long-term effects, especially for the young population, these young kids. I think it's really going to cause effect if we don't talk about it, you know, as it's happening, and change people's mind about their state of being.
Absolutely. I've got some friends I work with, and I've spent years sort of doing sort of research labs in movement, where we just get on the floor and explore movement, and they're contact improvisation people as well. So, you know, it's a lot of contact with the ground. So we're kind of doing stuff which is non-contact contact improvisation, where we use the ground as the medium to work with. And, you know, maybe there's a melt roller there or something like that you just move over, because it's acting as another body, but you then learn to commit your weight to it and wait until you find that right point to move and continue on from there. So when you kind of stand up after that, you feel fully flushed. You know, the whole body is being touched pretty much everywhere it can be. And then you stand pretty much through your middle. You're not in your front, you're not in your back, you're not in your sides, you're through the center of the body. Mm-hmm. And then there's the quality of moving really fluidly after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that those things can occur, but you're right. I mean, it's so powerful. Simple, it's so simple, and it's so powerful.
So Sue, we'll leave it there. I mean, it's been about an hour. It's really quite cool. I'd love to do a part 2 at some point where we can sort of pick on a specific subject as well.
Absolutely.
I'll round this up by saying, you know, how do people find you if they haven't heard of you before? So where do they find you?
Yeah, you can go to meltmethod.com, MELT method. I'm on Facebook, we're on Instagram, follow at Melt Method there. I have a streaming platform called Melt on Demand. I put out a new video every week, so you can check those things out. And we do teacher trainings and self-care courses online that you can all find at Melt Method. So check out meltmethod.com.
Fantastic. Sue, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to speak to you, and I love chatting. You could just do this for hours and hours.
Exactly. I could talk to you all day. Lots of love.
So what you want to do?